The message that broke me was not the one my daughter-in-law meant to send me. It appeared on my phone while I was lying under a thin hospital blanket, waiting for a doctor to tell me whether the pain in my chest was something I could go home with or something my children would have to pretend to worry about. If the doctor says she can't live alone, we can finally move her out. That was all it said. No apology. No mistake. Just one clean sentence, sitting on my screen like a receipt for a lifetime of misplaced trust. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My name is Eleanor Whitaker. I was 72 years old that winter, widowed for 4 years, and still living in the small white house in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where my husband Arthur and I had raised our 2 children. That morning, I had been making oatmeal in my kitchen when the room tilted. One moment I was reaching for the cinnamon. The next, I was sitting on the linoleum floor with my back against the cabinet, listening to the old refrigerator hum like nothing important had happened. Daniel arrived first, breathing hard, asking too many questions without waiting for answers. Melissa came 20 minutes later, still wearing her office blouse and the annoyed expression people wear when bad timing feels personal. Claire, my daughter-in-law, drove behind the ambulance in her SUV and walked into the emergency room looking polished, calm, and concerned in the exact way people look when they know strangers are watching. For the first hour, they performed beautifully. Daniel squeezed my shoulder when the nurse passed by. Melissa told the receptionist, "She's always been so independent," with a sad little smile. Claire stood near the foot of my bed and asked about discharge planning before anyone had even told us what was wrong. Then, one by one, they disappeared. Daniel said he needed to take a business call in the parking lot. Melissa said she was going to get coffee from the cafeteria. Claire said she would handle some paperwork because Mom shouldn't be bothered with forms right now. I waited. The curtain around my bed shifted whenever nurses walked past. A machine beside me beeped softly. Across the hall, someone laughed at something on television. The chair beside my bed stayed empty. The coffee never came. After 2 hours, I told myself they were busy. After 3, I stopped lying to myself. That was when my phone buzzed and Claire's message appeared. She deleted it seconds later, but I had already seen enough. My hand trembled so badly that the phone slipped onto the blanket. I did not cry. Crying would have made it feel like grief, and this was colder than grief. This was paperwork. This was planning. This was my own children waiting for a doctor to give them permission to remove me from my own life. I turned my face toward the window, though there was nothing to see except the gray side of the hospital building and a strip of winter sky. I remember thinking Arthur would have known what to do. Arthur always knew when a room had gone dishonest. He would have put one warm hand over mine and said, "Ellie, don't sign anything until you understand who benefits." Just then, someone did put a hand over mine. Not Daniel's. Not Melissa's. Not any hand I recognized. It was large, warm, and careful, resting over my fingers as if asking permission without words. I turned my head and saw an older man sitting beside my bed. He had silver hair, a dark wool coat folded across his lap, and eyes so familiar they made my breath catch. "Don't answer them yet, Eleanor," he said quietly. I pulled my hand back, startled. "Who are you?" He looked toward the curtain, then back at me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "My name is Thomas Reed. Arthur asked me to come if they ever left you alone." For a moment, I forgot the hospital room, the beeping machine, the pale blanket over my knees. I only heard Arthur's name. Thomas Reed sat very still, as if he understood that one sudden movement might make me call for a nurse. He did not look like a man who had wandered in by mistake. His shoes were polished but old, his coat was expensive in the quiet way, and his face carried the kind of patience that comes from having waited years to say one sentence. "Arthur asked you to come?" I repeated, because the words made no sense and too much sense at the same time. Thomas nodded. "Not today specifically. He asked me to watch for a day like this." I looked toward the curtain, half expecting Daniel to walk in and laugh at the absurdity of it, but the hallway remained empty. My children were still gone. My daughter-in-law was somewhere in that building, probably smiling at a nurse while discussing my future as if I were a chair that needed moving. Thomas reached into the inside pocket of his coat, but stopped when he saw my body tense. "I will not hand you anything unless you ask for it," he said. That small courtesy nearly undid me. All morning, people had touched my wrist, moved my blanket, lifted my arm, discussed my blood pressure, my age, my risks, my options. No one had asked what I wanted. How did you know Arthur? I asked. A faint smile passed across his face. Not happy, not sad, something older than both. We met in Des Moines in 1971. He hired me after a property dispute with his brother. Later, we became friends. I studied him carefully. Arthur had told me almost everything, or so I had believed. He told me which teacher embarrassed him in 5th grade, how he once backed his father's truck into a corn crib, how nervous he had been the first time he asked me to dance. But he had never mentioned Thomas Reed. He never told me about you, I said. Thomas looked down at his hands. He had reasons, not cruel ones. The answer should have frightened me, but his voice had no threat in it, only restraint. Your husband loved you very much, Eleanor. Enough to worry about what would happen when he was no longer the person standing between you and other people's plans. I turned my face away because the sentence went straight into a place I had been trying not to touch. Other people's plans. That was exactly what Claire's message had been. Not concern, not fear. A plan. I thought of Daniel at 8 years old, refusing to sleep unless I checked under his bed for shadows. I thought of Melissa crying in the grocery store because I would not buy the cereal with the toy inside, then falling asleep against my shoulder before we reached home. I had known their small fears, their fevers, their favorite sandwiches, their school projects, their heartbreaks. I had carried them through life in ways they would never remember because children rarely remember the weight of being carried. They used to need me, I said, barely above a whisper. Thomas did not answer quickly. He let the words settle between us. Needing someone and valuing someone are not always the same thing. I closed my eyes. Outside the curtain, a nurse's cart rolled past with a soft rattle. Somewhere nearby, an elevator chimed. Ordinary sounds. The world continuing politely while mine rearranged itself. Claire sent that message by accident, I said. Then she deleted it. Did you save it? He asked. I shook my head. I was too stunned. Do not worry. A deleted message is not the only kind of truth. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me with a steadiness that reminded me painfully of Arthur. Not the same face, not the same voice, but the same refusal to be hurried by panic. Why today? I asked. Why appear now? Thomas glanced toward the doorway. Because your daughter-in-law called Brookhaven Senior Residence at 10:43 this morning from the hospital lobby and asked whether they accepted emergency placements after medical evaluation. My mouth went dry. Brookhaven was 20 miles outside Cedar Falls, set back from the highway behind a row of spruce trees. I had driven past it many times and always felt a strange sadness looking at the windows. Not because places like that were bad. Some people needed them. Some people were cared for well there. But I was not ready to have my life packed into a suitcase by people who had not sat beside me for 3 hours in an emergency room. How could you know that? I asked. Thomas finally removed a small envelope from his coat, but he kept it resting on his own knee. Because Arthur left instructions, and because I have been making phone calls since your neighbor Mrs. Hensley told me the ambulance came. Mrs. Hensley, of course. She had watched over the street for 30 years from behind lace curtains and never missed a thing. I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. Arthur trusted you that much? Thomas looked at the envelope, then at me. Arthur trusted me with the one thing he feared losing most. The room seemed to grow quieter. I knew before he said it. Not the house. Not the accounts. Not the old Buick sitting in my garage. Me. He meant me. And for the first time that day, the sting behind my eyes was not from abandonment. It was from being remembered. Thomas let the envelope rest on his knee, unopened, while I tried to understand the shape of the day I had woken into. Until that morning, I had believed my problem was a weak spell in the kitchen, maybe a skipped breakfast, maybe age finally tapping me on the shoulder with a little more force than usual. Now I understood the real emergency had been waiting outside my hospital curtain, dressed in polite voices and family concern. There is something else, Thomas said. You should see it before they come back. He did not reach for my phone. He only nodded toward it, where it lay face down on the blanket. My fingers felt stiff as I picked it up. The screen lit, and for one foolish second, I hoped to see an apology from Claire or a message from Daniel saying he was on his way back with coffee gone cold in his hand. Instead, there were 8 new messages in the family group chat, the one they had created after Arthur died to keep Mom in the loop. I was almost never in the loop. I was copied after decisions were made, informed after plans were settled, thanked after my help had already been assumed. Claire had written, "The nurse said they are waiting on labs." Daniel asked the doctor directly about whether she is safe alone. Melissa replied, "If they put that in writing, it solves a lot." Solves. Not helps. Not protects. Solves. I stared at that word as if it were a stain spreading across the screen. Daniel's response came next. "Mom will not fight it. She hates conflict." I read it twice. Then a third time. My son knew me well enough to use my gentleness against me. He knew I would rather swallow hurt than embarrass someone in public. He knew I still softened my voice when he sounded tired. He knew I had spent 45 years stepping around other people's tempers, smoothing tablecloths after arguments, changing subjects when dinners grew tense, pretending not to hear things that cut me. I had called it keeping peace. They had called it permission. Thomas watched my face, not the phone. "Do you want to stop reading?" he asked. "No," I said. My voice sounded different to me. Smaller, but clearer. I scrolled. Melissa had written, "What about the house?" Claire answered almost immediately. "Once she is placed somewhere safe, we can discuss selling. It is too much property for her anyway." Too much property. My house sat on less than half an acre, with a maple tree Arthur planted the year Melissa was born and a back porch Daniel helped paint when he was 12. It was not too much property when Claire needed me to host Easter because her kitchen remodel was not finished. It was not too much property when Melissa left her children with me for entire weekends and called it bonding time. It was not too much property when Daniel stored boxes in Arthur's garage and promised to pick them up next month for 6 years. It only became too much when they saw a way to turn my home into money. A soft sound escaped me, not quite a laugh. "They are talking as if I already left it." Thomas folded his hands. "That is why Arthur made sure leaving it would never be up to them." I looked at him, but he did not explain yet. He was careful with information, careful with timing. I understood then why Arthur had trusted him. Daniel would have rushed. Melissa would have cried. Claire would have smiled. Thomas simply waited until I could stand the truth without falling apart beneath it. The curtain moved slightly, and my heart jumped, but it was only a nurse checking the room across the hall. I lowered my phone to my lap. For years, I had explained away the little things. Thanksgiving dinner moved from 5 o'clock to noon without anyone telling me until the leftovers were packed. My granddaughter's school recital photographed from the front row while I sat at home waiting for the address Claire never sent. Melissa borrowing money with wet eyes, then forgetting to call on my birthday because, as she said, work has been insane. Daniel letting Claire answer questions meant for him. Claire calling me sweet but stubborn, in that bright voice that made insults sound like concern. Each memory had stood alone before, harmless enough to forgive. Now they lined up like witnesses. "I thought I was being sensitive," I said. "That is what people count on when they want you quiet." I turned back to the screen. One last message had appeared from Claire. "Be kind in front of the staff. We need this to look like her choice." My fingers stopped trembling. The room did not feel warmer, and my body did not feel stronger, but something inside me became very still. I set the phone down, screen facing up, and looked at Thomas. "What did Arthur leave me?" Thomas picked up the envelope at last. His expression did not change, but his eyes softened. "Not just money, Eleanor. Protection." Before he could say more, I heard Claire's voice in the hallway, smooth and sweet as poured syrup. "We are her family," she told someone. "We only want what is best for her." Thomas slid the envelope back into his coat and stood beside my bed. I looked at the empty chair, the pale blanket, the phone full of proof they never meant for me to see. Then I folded my hands in my lap and waited for my children to walk back in, not as rescuers, but as strangers who had finally said the quiet part where I could read it. Claire stepped through the curtain first, carrying a folder against her chest, as if it were a casserole she had brought to a church supper. Daniel followed behind her, rubbing the back of his neck, the way he used to do when he came home with a bad report card. Melissa came last, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, neither of them for me. For one strange second, I saw them as they had been years ago. Daniel with grass stains on his jeans, Melissa with ribbons in her hair, both of them running through my kitchen while Arthur pretended to be annoyed by the noise. Then the image faded, and there they were in the hospital light, grown, polished, and careful. Claire smiled when she saw Thomas, but only with her mouth. "I did not realize you had company, Eleanor." She always used my first name when she wanted to remind me I was not really her mother. "This is Thomas." "Read," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Daniel frowned. Who? Thomas offered no explanation. He simply stood beside my bed, hands relaxed, expression calm. That seemed to irritate Daniel more than any argument would have. Melissa set the coffees on the small rolling table, out of my reach, and leaned over me with a softness that felt borrowed. Mom, how are you feeling now? It was the first time she had asked since noon. I looked at her carefully. She was wearing the pearl earrings I gave her after Arthur's memorial service, the ones she had cried over because, she said, they made her feel close to him. I wondered when closeness had become something my children wore instead of practiced. I am tired, I said. Claire stepped forward before Melissa could answer. Of course you are. That is exactly why we need to start thinking realistically. There it was. Realistically. The word people use when they want cruelty to sound responsible. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, no one is trying to upset you. I looked at him, and for a moment I remembered a winter night when he was 10 and had the flu so badly I slept in a chair beside his bed for 2 nights, waking every hour to check his temperature. I had not called it upsetting. I had called it being his mother. What are you trying to do? I asked. Claire placed the folder on the edge of the mattress. The doctor has not cleared anything yet, but there are options we should consider. Brookhaven has a short-term evaluation program. It is not permanent unless it needs to be. Unless it needs to be. I heard the careful little door hidden inside that sentence. Melissa reached for my hand, but I moved it gently under the blanket. Her face tightened. Mom, we are worried about you living alone in that house. That house. Not your home. Not the place Dad built a life with you. That house. I thought of the back porch Arthur and I had painted pale blue because he said mornings deserved a cheerful color. I thought of the hallway wall where Daniel's height marks still hid behind a framed photograph. I thought of Melissa dancing barefoot in the kitchen after her first prom because her shoes hurt. My life was not real estate. My memories were not square footage. You were worried for 3 hours in the cafeteria? I asked. Daniel looked away. Claire's expression sharpened, then smoothed itself. That is not fair. No, I said quietly. It is not. The room fell still. The machine beside me kept its soft, steady rhythm. Thomas had not spoken, and somehow his silence gave mine more weight. Claire opened the folder. I saw printed forms, brochures, a page with Brookhaven's logo at the top. We only want to make this easier, she said. For whom? I asked. She blinked. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, please do not turn this into a fight. There it was again, the old role waiting for me. Be gentle. Be reasonable. Do not embarrass anyone. Keep peace at your own expense. I had worn that role so long it had left marks no one could see. I am not fighting, I said. I am asking. Melissa's eyes filled quickly, too quickly. Why are you acting like we are enemies? I looked at my daughter, and my heart hurt with a tiredness older than the hospital bed beneath me. Because I read the messages. Claire went pale in a way makeup could not hide. Daniel's eyes went straight to her, then to my phone on the blanket. Melissa whispered, "What messages?" No one answered her. That told me enough. Thomas finally spoke, his voice even and low. Before anyone discusses placement, property, or medical authority, Mrs. Whitaker should be informed of the documents already in place. Claire gave a small laugh. I am sorry, but this is a family matter. Thomas turned to her, polite as Sunday morning. No, Mrs. Whitaker. It became a legal matter when you attempted to arrange residential care without Eleanor's informed consent. Daniel stiffened. Who do you think you are? Thomas reached into his coat and removed the envelope. He did not hand it to Daniel. He handed it to me. My name was written across the front in Arthur's familiar handwriting. Eleanor. My breath caught so sharply that Melissa looked frightened for the first honest time that day. I ran my thumb over the letters. Arthur had touched this paper. Arthur had thought of me sitting somewhere exactly like this, surrounded by people who called themselves family, while discussing how to remove me from my own life. I opened the envelope with slow fingers. Inside was a single page, folded once. The first line read, Ellie, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry, and I am sorry. The room blurred, but I did not let the tears fall. Not yet. I looked up at my children, then at Claire, who was staring at that letter as if it had walked out of a grave carrying a key. For the first time since I had arrived at the hospital, no one was speaking over me. No one was explaining me. No one was moving me. They were all waiting to hear what Arthur had left behind. I unfolded Arthur's letter with both hands, afraid the paper might tear if I breathed too hard. His handwriting leaned slightly to the right, just as it always had on birthday cards and grocery lists and the notes he used to leave on the kitchen counter when he went out early for hardware store errands. Ellie, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry, and I am sorry. I never wanted you to learn about my fears this way. I wanted to believe the children would remember who sat beside their beds, who worked extra hours, who gave up small comforts so they could have bigger lives. But love does not always teach gratitude. Sometimes it teaches people where the door is, and they still choose to walk out. My throat tightened, but I kept reading. Daniel shifted his weight near the foot of the bed. Melissa pressed a tissue to her eyes, though no tears had fallen yet. Claire stood perfectly still, the folder now hanging uselessly at her side. Arthur had written that months before he passed. He overheard a conversation between Daniel and Claire in our kitchen. They thought he was asleep in the recliner. Claire had been talking about how the house would be wasted if I kept living there alone. Daniel had said selling it would solve several problems. Arthur wrote that he waited for Daniel to correct her, to defend me, to say the house was my home before it was ever an asset. But Daniel said nothing. In the letter, Arthur admitted that silence frightened him more than Claire's words. I looked up at my son. His face had gone gray. Dad misunderstood, he said quickly. Thomas did not respond. Neither did I. I lowered my eyes to the page again. Arthur had taken steps after that day. Quiet steps. Legal steps. The kind of steps he knew I would have resisted because I always wanted to believe the best of our children. He had placed the house into a living trust, naming me as the lifetime resident with full authority to remain there as long as I chose. No sale, no transfer, no loan against it. No family vote could remove me. He had also created a separate care fund to pay for help at home if I ever needed it, from house cleaning to nursing visits to transportation, without requiring Daniel or Melissa to approve a dime. My hand stopped shaking, not because the hurt was gone, but because the floor beneath me had returned. Claire found her voice first. That cannot be right. Arthur never mentioned any of this. Thomas looked at her calmly. Arthur was not required to mention it to you. Daniel's mouth tightened. I am his son. Thomas turned slightly. And Eleanor is his wife. The words landed with a quiet force that filled the room. For 4 years, since Arthur's funeral, I had felt my place shrinking. Widow, mother, burden, problem, patient, possible placement. But wife, Arthur's wife, the woman he had chosen, protected, trusted, and loved. I had not realized how badly I needed to hear someone say it out loud. Melissa stepped closer, her voice trembling in a way that might have worked on me yesterday. Mom, we were only trying to help. You have to understand how scary this is for us. I folded the letter carefully along its old crease. What was scary? I asked. My blood pressure, or the thought that I might go home. She flinched. Daniel rubbed his forehead. This is getting twisted. Claire was looking into options. That is all. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him. The family messages were still there, bright and undeniable. His own words sat in the middle of them. Mom will not fight it. She hates conflict. Daniel stared at the screen, and for the first time in my life, my son had no excuse ready. Claire tried to step between us. Private family. Texts can be emotional. People say things under stress. Thomas reached into his coat again and removed another document, thicker than the letter, clipped neatly at the top. Then it may relieve you to know the trust anticipated stressful behavior. Claire's eyes flicked to the pages. Thomas continued, still polite, still measured. Any beneficiary who attempts to pressure Eleanor into residential care, interfere with her medical decisions, restrict her access to her home, or pursue sale of trust property against her wishes forfeits their future distribution. Melissa's hand went to her mouth. Daniel turned toward Claire, and something passed between them that looked very much like blame. Not remorse. Blame. That small difference told me everything. I thought I would feel satisfaction when they understood what they had risked. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of being the soft place everyone landed and the first place everyone reached when they wanted something. Tired of mistaking need for love. Tired of waiting for my children to become the people I had tried to raise. I looked down at Arthur's letter one more time. At the bottom, he had written, Ellie, you do not have to be cruel to be strong. Just stop handing matches to people who keep standing near your house. A sound caught in my chest, almost a laugh, almost a sob. That was Arthur. Gentle, practical, and still able to make a point from beyond the grave. I set the letter on my lap and looked at Thomas. What do I need to do now? Claire inhaled sharply. Eleanor, please. I turned to her. Really looked at her. The smooth hair, the careful coat, the folder full of plans she had made for me without me. You called Brookhaven before the doctor gave me my results, I said. You discussed my house while I was lying alone in this room. Her lips parted, but no answer came. I nodded once, not for her, but for myself. Then please do not ask me to trust your concern. Thomas did not answer me right away. He looked first at the monitor beside my bed, then at the curtain, then at the three people standing as if they had been invited into a room that no longer belonged to them. The first thing, he said, is that Eleanor speaks for herself. Such a simple sentence. 6 words, ordinary enough to pass unnoticed in another life. But in that hospital room, it felt like a chair being pulled back to the table after years of being left in the hallway. Daniel frowned. No one said she could not speak. Thomas looked at him. You discussed her placement without asking her. Melissa lowered her eyes. Claire opened her mouth, but I raised one hand. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough. She stopped. That surprised me more than it surprised her. The nurse stepped in a moment later, a woman named Karen with kind eyes and a clipboard tucked under one arm. Everything all right in here? She asked, sensing the temperature of the room without needing anyone to explain it. Claire recovered first. We are fine. We were just discussing discharge options for Eleanor. No, I said. Everyone turned to me. My voice was not loud, but it carried. They were discussing them. I was not. Karen looked from me to the folder in Claire's hand. Her expression changed in that professional way nurses have when politeness becomes documentation. Mrs. Whitaker, would you like anyone to step out? For 72 years, I had been trained by love, habit, church manners, motherhood, and widowhood to say no, do not make a fuss. The words rose automatically, ready to save everyone from discomfort except me. I almost said them. Then I saw Arthur's letter lying across my blanket. Ellie, you do not have to be cruel to be strong. I looked at Claire first. Yes, I said. I would like Claire to step out. The silence that followed was so complete, I heard the heating vent click above us. Claire's face hardened, then softened when she remembered the nurse was watching. Eleanor, surely you do not mean that. I do. Daniel stepped forward. Mom, come on. I turned to him. He looked tired, embarrassed, more worried about the scene than the wound beneath it. You may stay for now, I said, but only if you stop speaking for me. His mouth closed. Melissa began to cry then, quietly, carefully, as if tears could still move furniture in the room. Mom, I do not understand how we got here. I looked at my daughter and wished, with an ache that went all the way back to the hospital where I first held her, that I could believe her. We got here one small omission at a time, I said. One changed dinner. One unanswered call. One holiday I heard about after it happened. One message you thought I would never read. Claire clutched the folder tighter. Karen stepped toward the curtain and held it open. Ma'am, Mrs. Whitaker has made a request. Claire looked at Daniel, waiting for him to rescue her from the consequence of her own confidence. He did not move. That was not courage. Not yet. It was shock. But even shock can create a little space for truth. Claire walked out with her chin lifted, leaving the folder behind on the rolling table. Thomas watched her go, then turned to Karen. Mrs. Whitaker would also like her chart updated to show that no residential placement discussions are to be held without her present and consenting. Karen nodded. I can add a note. The doctor will also want to speak with Mrs. Whitaker directly. Good, I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. Good. Not maybe. Not whatever you think. Good. Daniel sat down at last, but not in the chair beside me. He chose the one near the wall, as if distance could protect him from being seen clearly. Melissa wiped her cheeks. Mom, I never wanted you hurt. I looked at her hands, soft and manicured, wrapped around a coffee cup she still had not offered me. Wanting is easy, sweetheart. Choosing is where people show themselves. Her face crumpled, and this time the tears seemed less rehearsed. But pain in someone else does not erase what they helped carry into the room. Thomas placed the legal document on my blanket and pointed to a section without touching me. This confirms your right to remain at home and use the care fund for support services. It also allows you to name a temporary medical contact today, if you wish. Daniel lifted his head. Temporary medical contact? Mom, I am your son. I turned to him slowly. Yes. And today you left me alone while your wife called a senior residence. He looked down. I could almost see the boy he used to be under the man he had become, but I had spent too long forgiving. The man because I remembered the boy. Karen handed me a pen. My fingers closed around it. Small. Blue. Ordinary. The kind of pen you use to sign receipts, birthday cards, school forms, permission slips. I had signed so many things for my children. Field trips. Loans. Checks. Apologies I did not owe. That afternoon, I signed something for myself. I wrote my name carefully, Eleanor May Whitaker, on the line that removed Daniel as my automatic emergency contact. Then I wrote Thomas Reed as temporary contact until further notice. Daniel stood up. Mom. I did not look away from the paper. You once told Claire I hated conflict. I said. You were right. I do hate it. But I have learned there is something worse than conflict. I handed the pen back to Karen. Being erased quietly by the people you kept choosing loudly. Daniel stared at the paper as if my signature had become a locked door. For most of his life, my son had believed there would always be a way back to the soft version of me. The mother who made excuses before he offered them. The widow who nodded through disappointment because arguing felt too heavy. But that woman had been left in this room for 3 hours, and something in her had changed while the chair beside her stayed empty. Karen took the signed form and clipped it to her board. I will update this right away, Mrs. Whitaker. Mrs. Whitaker. Not honey. Not dear. Not confused. My name sounded almost formal in the air, and I found I liked the shape of it. Melissa sat down slowly, her coffee untouched between her hands. Is this because of the money? She asked. The question was so small, so revealing, that I almost felt sorry for her. No, I said. It is because you think everything eventually becomes money. She looked wounded, but she did not deny it. Thomas picked up the Brookhaven folder and placed it on the table beside the bed without opening it. This will not be needed today. Daniel looked toward the curtain, where Claire had disappeared. You do not know that. The doctor could still say she needs help. Help is not the same as removal, Thomas said. Your father understood the difference. At the mention of Arthur, Daniel's jaw tightened. Do not talk to me about my father like you knew him better than I did. Thomas studied him for a long moment. His expression held no anger, only a tired disappointment that made Daniel look younger. I knew the parts of him he protected from you. That sentence settled heavily over the room. Daniel looked away first. A few minutes later, the doctor came in, a calm woman named Dr. Patel with silver at her temples and a tablet in her hand. She explained that my tests showed dehydration, elevated blood pressure, and stress, but no major event that required long-term facility care. She recommended medication adjustment, follow-up with my primary physician, and temporary support at home for a few days. Temporary support at home. The words moved through me like fresh air. Claire must have been waiting just outside because she stepped back in before Dr. Patel had finished speaking, her face rearranged into concern. Doctor, with all respect, Eleanor has had several episodes lately. She forgets things. She gets confused. I turned my head toward her. Name one. Claire blinked. Excuse me. Name one thing I forgot that put me in danger. Her eyes moved to Daniel, then Melissa. No one helped her. Dr. Patel looked at her tablet. Mrs. Whitaker answered all orientation questions correctly. She understands her situation and is able to participate in decisions. Claire's smile thinned. Of course. I just worry that pride may influence what she tells people. There it was again. My independence dressed up as pride. My voice dressed up as confusion. My home dressed up as a hazard. I looked at Dr. Patel. I would like home care for 1 week, as recommended. I would like my prescriptions sent to Miller's Pharmacy on Franklin Street. And I would like no information shared with anyone except Mr. Reed until I change that in writing. The doctor nodded without hesitation. That is your right. Claire's face changed then, not dramatically, but enough. A small crack near the eyes. A tightening at the mouth. She had walked into that hospital believing I was a problem to be managed. Now she was discovering I was a person with rights, records, witnesses, and a husband who had planned further ahead than she had. Daniel stepped toward my bed. Mom, please, do not shut us out completely. I looked at him, and for a moment my anger softened into something sadder. I did not shut you out, Daniel. I waited for you to come back in. His eyes reddened. Maybe from shame. Maybe from fear. Maybe from seeing the inheritance slip further away with every word. I no longer trusted myself to know the difference. Melissa whispered, What happens now? Thomas answered before I could. Now Eleanor rests. Then she goes home. Home. The word was almost too much. I pictured the maple tree outside my bedroom window, the blue porch, Arthur's old mug still on the second shelf, because I could never bring myself to move it. I pictured my key turning in my own front door. No suitcase packed by Claire. No brochure folded on the kitchen table. No polite explanation about what was best for me. Claire picked up her folder, but her hand shook slightly. This is not over, she said, softly enough that Dr. Patel might miss it, but I did not. Thomas looked at her. No, it is not. The trust administrator will be notified of today's events. Claire went very still. Daniel turned to her. What does that mean? For the first time all afternoon, Claire had no polished answer. I leaned back against the pillow, exhausted but clear. The monitor continued its steady rhythm beside me, marking each second I remained exactly where I was. Alive, awake, unmoved. I looked at my children, then at the woman who had mistaken my silence for surrender. It means, I said, that your plans finally reached the person who could stop them. Claire did not leave immediately. She stood at the edge of the room with the Brookhaven folder pressed flat against her coat, as if holding it tightly enough could make the pages inside matter again. Daniel was staring at her now instead of me, and for once I was not the person being quietly examined. What did Thomas mean? He asked her. Claire gave a little shake of her head. He is trying to scare us. Thomas remained beside my bed, not defending himself, not filling the room with explanations. That was one of the strangest comforts about him. He did not rush to prove he was right. He simply waited for the truth to become uncomfortable on its own. Daniel looked back at me. Mom, what happens if the trust administrator is notified? I ran my thumb along the edge of Arthur's letter. The paper had softened from being unfolded and folded again, but the words still held. I think you already know enough to be worried, I said. Melissa made a small sound. Mom, please do not punish all of us because Claire got carried away. Claire turned on her so quickly the polished mask slipped. Do not put this on me. There it was. Not concern. Not unity. Not family. Just the first crack in a plan that had only worked while everyone believed I would stay quiet. Melissa's face flushed. You made the call to Brookhaven. After we all agreed she could not manage the house forever, Claire said. Daniel looked between them, and I watched understanding arrive slowly, unwillingly. He had told himself Claire was handling details. Melissa had told herself she was being practical. Claire had told herself she was the smartest person in the room. And all of them had depended on me being too tired, too polite, or too heartbroken to read the room clearly. Dr. Patel excused herself to finalize my discharge instructions for the next morning. Karen followed. But before she left, she touched the rail of my bed lightly and said, "Press the call button if you need anything, Mrs. Whitaker." It was such a normal sentence, yet I held on to it. If I needed anything, I could press a button. I could ask. I could choose. After they left, Thomas placed a clean copy of the trust summary on the table where Melissa had set the coffees. Eleanor, you do not need to discuss this now, he said. But they should understand one point clearly. He turned the document so the others could see the highlighted section. Any documented attempt to coerce, misrepresent, isolate, or relocate Eleanor for financial benefit triggers a review. If the administrator determines bad faith, future distributions may be suspended or revoked. Daniel swallowed. Revoked? Thomas nodded. Arthur was precise. A silence followed, and inside that silence I heard years of little. Comments come back to me. Claire saying, "This place must be exhausting for you," while looking at my dining room like she was measuring it for sale. Melissa asking whether I really needed both guest bedrooms. Daniel joking that Dad had left me sitting on a gold mine. At the time, I smiled. I poured coffee. I changed the subject. I thought love meant not embarrassing people when their greed showed by accident. Now I understood greed rarely appears by accident. It tests the door before it walks in. Claire's voice lowered. We were not trying to profit. We were trying to make a plan. A plan that began without me, I said. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something almost like anger underneath her fear. You have no idea how difficult this has been for Daniel. The house, the upkeep, the constant worry. I almost laughed. The constant worry had not brought him back to my bedside with coffee. The constant worry had not made him mow my lawn, fix the loose porch rail, or sit with me on Arthur's birthday. Their worry seemed to bloom only when paperwork did. Daniel is 45 years old, I said. If he is tired, he can rest. He cannot sell my home to feel better. Daniel flinched. Melissa stared into her lap. Claire's lips pressed together. For the first time, none of them corrected me. Thomas gathered the papers and slid them back into his folder. Eleanor will be discharged home when the doctor approves it. The care fund will cover a visiting nurse, transportation, and a home safety check. The locks can be changed if she requests it. Daniel looked hurt by that. You would change the locks on your own children? I looked at his face and remembered unlocking doors for him at midnight when he forgot his key, opening the kitchen door before he even knocked, making sure there was always soup in the freezer when he came by tired. I had spent decades making entry easy for him. He had mistaken that for ownership. I would change the locks on anyone who thinks my door is only valuable when it can be opened for profit, I said. Melissa started crying again, but softer this time, almost soundless. Maybe she was grieving me. Maybe she was grieving what she thought she would inherit. I wished I could tell the difference. Visiting hours ended at 8 o'clock. Karen came in and gently reminded everyone. Claire left first, walking quickly, her heels tapping against the hallway floor. Daniel paused beside my bed, waiting for the old habit of forgiveness to rise between us. I gave him no speech, no comfort, no promise. Melissa kissed the air near my cheek and whispered, "I love you, Mom." I closed my eyes because I could not carry the weight of answering. When they were gone, the room felt larger, but not empty. Thomas sat back down in the chair beside my bed. For a while, neither of us spoke. The winter sky outside had gone dark, and my reflection in the window looked pale, tired, and older than it had that morning. But it also looked present. Still here. Still mine. I touched Arthur's letter on my lap and said, "He really thought of everything." Thomas looked at the window, his voice quiet. "Not everything." I turned to him. He was watching me with a sadness that did not belong to the legal papers or the hospital room. "There is one thing Arthur asked me to tell you only after you knew you were safe." My hand stilled on the blanket. "What thing?" Thomas took a slow breath. "Who I was before I became his lawyer." Thomas folded his hands in his lap, and for the first time since he had appeared beside my bed, he looked unsure. Not weak, not nervous, just human. "Before I knew Arthur," he said, "I knew you." I stared at him, searching his face again, past the silver hair, past the careful suit, past the years that had settled over him like dust on a photograph. Something moved in my memory. A college library in Des Moines. Rain against tall windows. A young man with dark hair offering me the last pencil from his jacket pocket because mine had rolled under a table. I had not thought about that pencil in more than 50 years. "Tommy Reed," I whispered. His eyes softened. "You remember." I covered my mouth with one hand. Not because the memory was shameful. It was not. It was simply buried under a lifetime. Before Arthur, before children, before mortgages and school lunches and hospital bracelets, there had been a summer. When I was 21 and believed the whole world was still deciding what to become. Thomas had walked me to class. He had carried books I insisted were not heavy. He had asked me once, outside a little diner on Locust Street, whether I thought two people could recognize each other too early in life. Then my mother got sick, I came home, and the letter I wrote him stayed in my dresser drawer until time made it pointless. "Arthur knew?" I asked. Thomas nodded. "Years later. I told him when we became friends. I thought he should know." I looked down at Arthur's letter, feeling the strange wideness of a love big enough not to fear the truth. "And he still trusted you." He said any man who had loved you once and asked nothing from it might be trusted to protect you later. My eyes burned then, and this time I let the tears come. Quietly. No shaking. No collapse. Just tears slipping down my face for Arthur, for the young woman I had been, for the older woman I had almost allowed my children to fold away into someone else's plan. Thomas handed me a tissue, and even that small gesture carried a gentleness I had not felt all day. "I am not here to reopen the past," he said. "Arthur did not ask that of me. He asked me to make sure you still had a future." The next morning, Dr. Patel cleared me to go home with a visiting nurse scheduled for the week and a follow-up appointment already arranged. Daniel called twice before breakfast. I let both calls go unanswered. Melissa sent a message saying she was sorry things had gotten emotional. I did not reply. Claire sent nothing. That was the most honest thing she had done. Thomas drove me home in a dark sedan that smelled faintly of leather and peppermint. Cedar Falls looked ordinary through the window, the grocery store sign, the gas station on the corner, the church marquee announcing a pancake breakfast on Saturday. Ordinary had never seemed so beautiful. When we pulled into my driveway, the maple tree stood bare against the winter sky, and the blue porch looked a little faded in the morning light. My house had not changed, but I had. Mrs. Hensley was watching from across the street, one hand lifting the curtain. I lifted mine back. Thomas carried my small hospital bag to the door, but he did not reach for my keys. He waited. That nearly made me cry again. I unlocked my own front door. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. The oatmeal bowl was still in the sink from the morning I fell. Arthur's mug sat on the second shelf. The hallway was quiet. Mine. All of it still mine. Later that afternoon, a locksmith came and changed the front and back locks. I stood in the kitchen listening to the clean turn of new metal, and I did not feel cruel. I felt awake. Thomas left a copy of the documents in a folder on the dining room table and wrote his number on a yellow sticky note in careful block letters. Before he stepped onto the porch, he turned back. You do not have to decide today what kind of family they get to be now. I nodded. No, I said. Today I decide what kind of woman I get to be. He smiled then, not like a savior, not like a stranger, but like someone who had kept a promise and found me still standing at the end of it. After he left, I made tea in Arthur's old kettle and sat by the window as the afternoon light moved across the floor. My children had left me alone in a hospital room, believing that was where my choices would end. They were wrong. That room was where I found the witness, the letter, the key, and the part of myself I had misplaced while loving people who mistook my silence for surrender. I did not know whether Daniel or Melissa would ever become people I could trust again. I did not know whether Thomas would remain a friend, a memory, or something life had returned to me simply to prove I was not forgotten. But I knew this. My door had new locks, my name was still on my life, and for the first time in 4 years, I slept that night without waiting for anyone to come home.